The first theory we'll talk about in persuasion is the elaboration likelihood model. But before we begin, we just have a fairly generic definition of persuasion. It's communication aimed at influencing another's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. It's where we communicate in a way to try to get people to do something, to think about something in a certain way, or to have a certain feeling. So the elaboration likelihood model is one of the more popular models to talk about with regard to persuasion. It basically says that when we process messages, we do one of two routes. We go through one of two routes, according to the theory. So central processing is very thoughtful, deliberate, and we focus on the message content. So we're looking at the reasoning, we're looking at the evidence supporting it, we're looking at what data that there is on that topic. So we're doing it in a very rational way. We're doing it critically, rationally, analytically, processing the message. Peripheral processing, on the other hand, is less cognitive and more focused on feelings that one might have about the message or the message producer. So does the message kind of make us happy or sad? Do we find that the person has credibility, or do we think that they don't? Are they attractive? Are they a celebrity? Do we like them or not? If we make sense out of a message and react in a certain way to a message based upon how the message is being presented, like through nonverbal behaviors or through one's communication style, or the person who is presenting it, whether we like them or not, that's peripheral processing. Central processing, on the other hand, is focusing on message content. So let me talk you through this model. In the book, there's a model that they have, but I actually like this one better because of what I can show you that I'm able to do with it here in a minute. So in the central processing route, the first question addressed is, are we motivated to process the message? Do we care about watching it, listening to it, paying attention to it? And if the answer is no, we may then shift over to the peripheral route where we don't really pay attention to what the message is, just maybe how the message is packaged and what's going on there. But if we are motivated to process it so that we concentrate on message content, the next thing is, are we able to process it? Like, is it in language we understand? Is it done in a way that helps us make sense out of what the speaker or the communicator is trying to do? So for example, you may be very interested in a topic that a teacher may be talking about, or that you may see on a YouTube or a TED Talk or something like that. But they use language and terminology that you don't really understand very well. And it's hard for you to make sense out of the message. And in that case, if you're not able to process it, you might go over to the peripheral route. Sometimes when people go to the doctor's office, they oftentimes are certainly very motivated to process what the doctor is talking about, and yet the doctor sometimes uses language that makes it difficult for them to understand. So if they are both motivated and able to process, then we go into the type of processing that the person is doing. And when it's objective processing, what we're doing is we're listening for the arguments and the case to be made in the message, and we don't have any preconceived bias. So if we were to talk about something like, say, a high-speed rail route that might connect Dallas to Houston, and I'm talking to a group of people about this possibility. If I don't really know much about it, I don't have strong feelings for it one way or the other, but I'm very interested in a rail route that would go from Houston to Dallas with a stop near College Station, then I would listen to it in a very objective way because I'm interested in it and I want to learn something about it. On the other hand, if I already have a strong feeling toward the topic, I may get into biased processing. And this is where I have strong feelings and I have a certain view that I support. So for example, if I'm also talking about the high-speed rail project, but I'm talking to landowners who will be affected by it and whose land will be confiscated in part so that the rail could go through, then I might have strong negative feelings about the rail, this high-speed rail coming across my pasture land and disrupting my livestock or crops or something like that. So that would be bias processing, and we have a lot of bias processing today in the world today. However you feel about gun control or climate change or some of those things, what news station is most credible. Some people have very biased processing that they assume that one is right and the other is wrong. So that's a difference between objective and bias. Objective, we look at it and we don't have any preconceived notion or position on it. We just want to listen to the evidence and then make a decision based upon the quality of the message and the arguments. If it's biased, we're going to look at it in terms of what the message is relative to what we want to believe. So if we think the message is making a weak case, we won't like it. We'll have negative attitude change. We'll respond in a negative way. But on the other hand, if it makes a strong case, either because the evidence is convincing or because it really is saying something that we are interested in supporting our particular view, then we can have positive attitude change toward that position or reinforcing that position. Now, that deals with the central processing. Let's now talk about the peripheral route. So if I'm not able to motivated, perhaps I'm not motivated, I'm not able, then what I'm going to do is be looking at it not in terms of paying attention to message content, but to other peripheral cues. Like, what's the credibility of the person? What is it they look like? You know, are they attractive? Or do they dress nice? Are they very animated? You know, do they make me laugh? Do they tell jokes and make me laugh and things like that? And in that way, I'm listening to it, and I may be persuaded positively if I'm having a lot of positive reactions to the message, to the speaker and the way the speaker's delivering it. Or I may react negatively if I don't like the way the speaker or like the way the speaker is presenting it. But my attitude change won't be very strong because I'm not really focused on really the message content. It'll be just kind of a passing attitude change. Now that's what the theory says. All right, so that's the important thing. It's not whether or not this theory is right. There is some support for it, but that's what the theory says. What the original theory did not do is take into account parallel processing, and that's important. These dotted lines that you see here indicate ways in which peripheral cues can actually promote central processing. If I find a speaker interesting and I'm engaged by their communication style, their humor gets me paying attention to what they're saying, then it may increase my motivation to process. Through the use of whatever kinds of support materials or slides or examples, it might help my ability to process. And so those peripheral cues could lead me into central processing. And conversely, the other direction may work as well, to go from central to peripheral. And that is if a person makes a well-constructed, a very articulate argument in a way in which they make a lot of sense and they are providing evidence for their position. To me, that builds that speaker's credibility, and therefore that central route of good messaging can then make me think more highly of the speaker. So that parallel processing is important because it allows the two routes to go interchangeably there to reinforce message processing. So key findings as it relates to this theory: personally important topics lead to more central processing, but we're not sure to what extent that is going to be objective or if it's going to be biased. Lots of time, personally important topics, they're personally important because people are very biased toward them because they have a particular position on it. Topics of little importance to us will lead to peripheral processing, so we won't be paying attention to it that much. Processing ability is really facilitated by clear messages and simpler arguments. And by that I mean this helps people in their ability to process. If you make your messages very clear, very understandable, and your arguments are not too complex. They can be simple arguments but still be very strong arguments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's an example of parallel processing, and that's real important because I will likely ask a question, put some examples in there about parallel processing between the central route and the peripheral route. As I said, peripheral cues can increase interest, and central processing can enhance credibility, to summarize those points I made earlier.